My boss put his inexperienced son in charge of a hospital build and tried to make me rubber stamp the shortcuts. So I walked away, and the safety test lit up their paperwork. All right, Reddit. So my boss tried to get me to sign off on safety systems that weren't tested because his son needed to look good on a hospital project. I said no, quit, and watched the whole thing blow up in their faces. I need to give you some context first. I'm Gabriel, 51M. I've done fire protection/life safety commissioning for 19 years. I'm the guy who makes sure the sprinklers, alarms, and smoke control actually work when it matters. Hospitals, data centers, high-rises, buildings where screwing up means people die. I take it seriously because I've seen what happens when people don't. Early in my career, I watched 3 guys go down from smoke inhalation during a test because somebody had propped open a fire door and disconnected the maglock. One of them was 22, first week on the job, spent 3 weeks in the hospital with lung damage he'll carry forever. I visited him twice. The second time, his mother asked me why her son couldn't breathe right anymore. Didn't have an answer for her. I'm also not easy to work with. I've got a short fuse when people try to cut corners on life safety for schedule reasons. A few years back, I got into it with a PM who wanted to skip fire pump testing and submit falsified data. Called him something HR made me apologize for in writing. That incident's been sitting in my personnel file ever since, ready to be pulled out whenever someone needs to paint me as the problem. Anyway, here's what happened. The Meridian Medical Tower was supposed to be Denver's flagship healthcare expansion. 14 stories of acute care, surgical suites, ICU floors, and a level 2 trauma center that would serve the entire northern metro area. $240 million of systems that had to work perfectly because the people inside would be vulnerable in ways office workers aren't. Patients on ventilators, surgery patients under anesthesia, newborns in the NICU. People who couldn't evacuate themselves if something went wrong. I was standing in the fire pump room on a Tuesday morning, March 11th, watching my best test tech, Rudy Espinoza, run preliminary checks on the electric fire pump controller when Stan Harlan walked in with his son trailing behind him like a shadow in an expensive hard hat. Stan was the senior project executive for Ridgeline on this job. 58 years old, silver hair, the kind of guy who learned construction management from spreadsheets rather than job sites. He'd been promising the hospital owner an August 15th substantial completion for 6 months, even though everyone with actual field experience knew we were tracking toward late September at best. The man was schedule-obsessed in a way that made my teeth hurt. His son Scooter, yeah, that's his name, was 27 with an MBA and about 14 months of actual construction experience. He'd been on the project 3 months, developing a reputation for value engineering ideas that sounded brilliant in meetings and fell apart completely in the field, and for taking credit for solutions other people developed while he was busy making phone calls. Stan stopped next to the fire pump controller. "Gabriel," he said, "we're making organizational changes. Scooter's moving into commissioning oversight. He'll coordinate all life safety testing going forward." I just glared at him. Scooter doesn't have commissioning experience. The fire marshal isn't going to accept documentation signed off by someone who doesn't understand what they're witnessing. Scooter stepped forward with that confident smile. "I've been studying the protocols. And honestly, I think we can streamline these procedures. There's a lot of redundancy in the testing schedule." Redundancy. That's what he called the verification steps that kept hospitals from burning down with patients inside. Stan cut in before I could respond. "The owner wants progress. We're behind on testing, and Scooter's going to help us catch up. You'll still be involved, but Scooter will be primary contact with the AHJ." I looked at the fire pump behind them. 500 GPM at 125 PSI, feeding 14 floors of hospital space. If this pump failed during a fire, people would die waiting for the fire department to establish water supply. "I'm not signing off on anything that isn't properly tested," I said, "and I'm not letting someone without experience represent our life safety readiness to the fire marshal." Stan's expression hardened. "Nobody's asking you to compromise, but you need to be a team player here. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I knew what team player meant in Stan's vocabulary, shutting up and going along with whatever made the schedule look better. That night, I got a call from my daughter, Haley. She was 24, had just finished her nursing program, and had accepted a surgical ICU position at the new tower. The hospital had given her a signing bonus and relocation package with a clawback clause tied to the opening date. If the tower didn't open on schedule, she'd lose the position or have to pay back money she'd already spent on her apartment deposit and moving expenses. "Dad, there are rumors about delays." "What's going on?" she asked. "It's complicated. Testing issues we need to work through." "Testing issues that you're causing?" I didn't answer. The silence stretched between us through the phone. "Look," she said, "I know you take safety stuff seriously, but do your job and don't ruin mine. I need this position. I've already signed the lease. She hung up before I could explain that I wasn't causing the problems. I was trying to prevent them. The next 2 weeks felt like watching a slow-motion car crash while being handcuffed to a chair. Scooter started changing the commissioning schedule without consulting me, compressing testing windows that had been carefully planned to allow for troubleshooting if systems didn't perform correctly the first time. Witness points that required AHJ attendance got eliminated or rescheduled to times when nobody could actually be present. Documentation requirements got streamlined in ways that would make any fire marshal ask uncomfortable questions. My access to project documentation got restricted. Emails that should have copied me started going only to Scooter. Meeting invitations disappeared from my calendar. Submittals I was supposed to review went through Scooter's office instead. I'd walk into rooms and conversations would stop. People I'd worked with for years suddenly couldn't make eye contact. My brother Pete was the union foreman for Consolidated Fire Protection, the sprinkler sub. 22 years running crews across dozens of major projects. Genuinely good at his work. Careful, detail-oriented. The kind of foreman who caught problems during installation, rather than waiting for them to show up during testing. But his guys were getting squeezed by the same schedule pressure affecting everyone else on the project. Scooter decided Pete's crews were too slow on their rough-in installation. He convinced Stan to bring in a non-union acceleration crew from a company nobody had ever heard of for the patient floors. Pete's guys got pushed to mechanical spaces and service areas, while the new crew took over the high-visibility work that would show up in progress photos. Pete called me Thursday night. His voice was exhausted. "Gabriel, these new guys don't know what they're doing. I found 3 branch lines today with wrong orifice heads installed. Wrong K-factor for the hazard classification. Light hazard heads in ordinary hazard areas. If those zones get tested, they'll fail. And the fire marshal is going to want to know who approved the installation. Did you document it? Submitted it to Scooter 3 days ago with photographs and specification references. Nothing's changed. Same wrong heads, same code violations, same problems waiting to blow up during testing. The next morning, I walked the patient floors myself and documented it properly. Wrong heads in ordinary hazard areas. Stuff that would fail the second an inspector looked. I photographed each room number in the head model, built a quick spreadsheet with locations and code notes, and emailed Scooter the full packet with the subject line, "Patient floor sprinkler head deficiencies. Immediate correction required." He replied, "Forward to the sprinkler sub." I printed that email and filed it. At that point, I wasn't collecting notes. I was collecting receipts. I felt the familiar heat building in my chest. Go around him. Give the documentation to me directly. I'll get it into the project record. Friday morning, I walked onto the 7th floor to find Scooter standing over Rudy at the fire alarm annunciator panel. Rudy had the panel open, multimeter in hand, running point-to-point verification on the initiating device circuits. Standard procedure that I'd watched him perform on 20 different projects. You test every device, verify every circuit, document every reading. That's the code. Scooter was pointing at his tablet, showing Rudy some kind of spreadsheet. We need to accelerate this significantly. Test every third device and extrapolate the rest. Statistical sampling will get us through verification in half the time. Rudy glanced up and saw me. His face said everything. The look of a guy being told to do something he knows is wrong by someone who doesn't understand why it's wrong, but has the authority to make his life miserable. He wants me to initial stuff I didn't test, Rudy said quietly as I approached. I walked over, my boots heavy on the concrete floor. What's happening here? Scooter didn't look up from his tablet. Streamlining the verification process. We can statistical sample instead of full device testing. It's a standard efficiency practice. Statistical sample doesn't exist in NFPA 72 for device verification. Every device gets tested. Every circuit gets verified. Not without a written alternative method approved by the AHJ. And we don't have that. Scooter finally looked at me with that condescending patience. The code allows for alternative methods with AHJ approval. Have you gotten AHJ approval for statistical sampling? Silence. I stepped between Scooter and the panel. Rudy, continue full verification. Every device, every circuit, per the approved commissioning plan that we submitted to the fire marshal's office. Scooter's jaw tightened. His face went red. I'm the commissioning coordinator now. I make these calls. You can coordinate whatever you want, but Rudy works for me, and he's not signing off on partial testing that violates code. Neither am I. If you want to explain to the fire marshal why you thought statistical sampling was acceptable, be my guest. The GC superintendent, Hank Webb, had walked up behind us during the exchange. He stood there with his arms crossed, weathered face expressionless, watching the confrontation unfold. The man had 30 years in the field. He'd seen every kind of corporate disaster, every kind of shortcut that seemed smart until it wasn't. Scooter looked at Hank like he expected backup. Hank just shook his head. That's not a schedule call. That's code. Can't help you there. Scooter's face went from red to almost purple. He jabbed a finger at me, close enough that I could feel the air move. This is exactly the obstruction my father warned me about. This attitude right here. This is why this project is behind schedule. Call it what you want. The testing protocol doesn't change. Scooter stormed off toward the stairwell, tablet clutched in his hand like a weapon he didn't know how to use. Hank watched him go, then turned to look at me. That's going to come back on you, he said quietly. You know that, right? I know. After that confrontation, Stan called me into his office. His assistant said immediately, which in corporate speak means drop everything and get your butt in here. He closed the door behind me, and when he turned around, the professional mask was completely gone. What I saw underneath was something colder. Let me be clear about something, Gabriel. His voice was quiet, controlled, dangerous. I don't need you to be right. I need you to sign. Your integrity doesn't pay liquidated damages. Either get on board or get out of my way. If this job slides, you'll be the reason on paper. That was the moment I knew there was no middle ground, no compromise, no way to protect myself from inside this organization, while also protecting the people who would eventually occupy this building. The following week, Pete called me again. This time, his voice was different, tighter, angrier. Gabriel, I got copied on an internal memo today. Scooter's blaming the sprinkler head deficiencies on my crews. Says we installed wrong equipment, deviated from approved specs. The memo's already been distributed to the whole project team. That's garbage. The wrong heads came from his acceleration crew. Your guys weren't even on those floors. I know that. You know that. But the memo's already out there. One of my apprentices called me today, asking if he's going to get fired. Kid's 23 years old, got a baby on the way, and he's terrified he's going to lose his job over something he didn't even do. I'll document what actually happened, create a record that shows the real timeline. That's not enough. My aunt called me last night. She heard from someone at the union hall that Consolidated might get blacklisted from future hospital work in the metro area if this project goes sideways with our name attached to the problems. That's not just my job, Gabriel. That's every guy on my crew. That's their families. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, feeling the weight of it. I can't fix this from inside, I told him. But I'm not going to let them pin it on you either. The following week, I started making phone calls, quietly, carefully, to people I'd worked with over the years who had moved on to other companies and other roles. One of those calls went to Sandra, who ran the commissioning division for an independent firm called Cornerstone Building Sciences. They specialized in owner's representative work, third-party commissioning oversight, and the kind of independent verification that building owners hired when they wanted someone whose paycheck didn't depend on the contractor's schedule performance. Sandra and I had worked together on a data center project in Aurora 5 years earlier. She knew my technical capabilities, understood my professional reputation, and recognized that the difficult aspects of my personality came packaged with a track record of projects that passed inspection. We met for lunch at a restaurant in Lodo, far enough from the Meridian job site that I wouldn't accidentally run into anyone from Ridgeline. She listened carefully while I explained the deteriorating situation. When I finished, she nodded slowly. We've actually been in preliminary discussions with the Meridian owner's insurance carrier about this project. Their risk management people are nervous. The hospital system is self-insured up to a significant threshold, which means they're personally exposed if something goes wrong. Their underwriters have been asking pointed questions about commissioning quality. We talked for another hour. By the end, I had a verbal commitment for a position as senior commissioning manager with Cornerstone, starting 6 weeks out to allow for proper transition. 15% salary increase, signing bonus that would cover transition costs, and explicit authority over my own testing protocols without interference from project executives who didn't understand what they were approving. I negotiated one additional term that mattered more to me than the money. No after-hours emergency calls for the first 90 days. I was done being the guy who got called at 2 in the morning to fix problems that other people had created through negligence. Done being the safety net. Done cleaning up disasters for people who'd never give me credit or protection in return. Sandra pushed back on that term initially. We sometimes need rapid response on critical projects. Then hire someone else for that first 90 days, I said. I've spent 25 years responding to emergencies that shouldn't have been emergencies. I need a clean break, she agreed. 3 days later, I had the written offer signed and locked in. The contract was solid. My attorney reviewed it. I had an exit strategy that didn't involve unemployment or desperation. The morning after I signed the Cornerstone offer, April 9th, Stan called me into his office. His assistant said immediately. Scooter was already seated when I arrived, along with Ridgeline's project attorney, a detail that told me everything about what was coming. Stan slid a multi-page document across his desk. We need you to sign the Life Safety System Readiness Certification Letter. The owner requires this documentation before we can apply for temporary certificate of occupancy. I read it carefully. A formal certification stating all life safety systems in the Meridian Medical Tower had been tested and commissioned per code and were ready for occupancy. My name typed on the signature line with space for my professional credentials. The fire pump acceptance test hasn't been witnessed by the AHJ, I said. Smoke control hasn't completed balancing procedures. Fire alarm verification is about 60% complete. The sprinkler system has documented deficiencies that haven't been corrected. Scooter jumped in. We can complete those items in parallel with the TCO review process. The systems are substantially ready for occupancy. Substantially ready isn't ready. I'm not signing a certification for systems that haven't been tested. Stan's voice hardened. This is fundamentally a business decision. Every day of delay past schedule costs significant liquidated damages, substantial money. Then find someone else to sign the letter. Because I won't. Stan leaned forward, trying to sound reasonable. Everyone signs these before the last punch list. It's standard practice. The completion happens in parallel. Then everyone's reckless. The attorney cleared his throat. For the record, Gabriel, you're declining to execute a document within the scope of your employment duties? I'm declining to commit fraud. Call it whatever you want. The silence stretched. Stan exchanged a look with the attorney. The fire marshal knows your name, Stan said finally. They know you've been commissioning lead for 18 months. If someone else signs, they'll ask questions. Good. They should ask questions, because this project isn't ready for occupancy. I stood up and pulled the envelope from my jacket, placed it on Stan's desk, directly on top of the unsigned certification. This is my resignation from Ridgeline Building Group, effective 2 weeks. I've accepted a position with another firm. I'll complete my documentation and transition files, but I won't sign letters certifying untested systems. Stan's face cycled through surprise, anger, then something like panic as he realized his backup plan had just walked out. My final 2 weeks at Ridgeline were an exercise in watching desperate people scramble for solutions to problems of their own creation. Stan brought in an outside consulting engineer from a firm I'd never heard of to review the life safety documentation and provide the certification the owner was demanding. The consultant spent 3 days on site, barely examined the actual installed systems, and signed the readiness letter with Scooter listed as the project commissioning coordinator who had overseen the testing program. I kept my head down during those weeks, finished my documentation, organized project files for transition, answered direct questions but didn't volunteer solutions to problems that weren't my responsibility anymore. I stopped working late to troubleshoot issues that should have been caught during proper commissioning. I stopped being the safety net. Pete called me midway through that first week. He was so mad. Scooter just CC'd the whole project team on an email, blaming my crews for the fire-stopping deficiencies too. Not just the sprinkler heads now. He's saying we installed wrong fire caulk, wrong intumescent materials, the whole thing. Did you install wrong materials? You know we didn't. We installed exactly what the submittals specified. Then the documentation will prove it. The documentation is being altered, Gabriel. One of my guys pulled up an inspection form he signed last month. His signature's still there, but the material spec references have been changed. Dates moved around. Someone went into the files and modified them. I felt cold settle in my chest. That's fraud. Yeah. And my family's been calling me nonstop. The union steward's already asking questions about whether guys should be cooperating with the investigation. Hold on to your original copies of everything. Don't sign anything new, and don't talk to Ridgeline's lawyers without your own representation present. That's it? That's your advice? For now, that's all I can give you from inside. But this isn't over. Haley called me the night before my last day. Her voice was different than our previous conversations. Less angry, more scared. Dad, she said. There's rumors at the hospital that the opening might get pushed back significantly. Serious construction issue. What's really happening? There are systems that need substantially more testing before the building's safe for patients. The contractor's been under pressure, and shortcuts were taken that are going to have consequences. Shortcuts you tried to stop? Yeah. She was quiet. I could hear her working through the implications. I love you, I said. I wouldn't do anything that put you or your patients at risk, but I can't sign my name to documents that aren't true. I know, Dad. I know. About 3 weeks after my last day at Ridgeline, I was sitting in my truck outside a coffee shop, reviewing project files for my first cornerstone assignment, when my phone started blowing up. Pete first. His voice was tight, breathless, with chaos clearly audible in the background. Gabriel, the fire pump test. It's happening right now and it's going completely sideways. What do you mean sideways? The pump failed. Like, failed. Pressure came in way under threshold. Controllers throwing fault codes nobody can clear. The fire department rep is in there right now, and he is absolutely losing his mind. I could hear voices overlapping behind him. Someone shouting about documentation. a door slamming somewhere. The official AHJ witnessed acceptance test, the one that had been rescheduled twice while I was still there because the systems weren't ready, was finally happening, and it was falling apart in real time. My phone buzzed with a text from Hank Webb. Fire pump acceptance test failed. 14 psi under minimum threshold. Scooter showing the AHJ the readiness cert right now. This is about to get very ugly fast. I sat there in my truck watching the messages stack up. Another text from Hank. AHJ rep just stepped outside to make a phone call. Face like thunder. Calling his supervisor. Scooter followed him out trying to explain, but the guy won't even look at him. Then, 3 more fire department vehicles just pulled into the lot. Fire marshal's personal vehicle. This is now officially a situation. My phone rang again. Rudy Espinoza this time. His voice was shaking in a way I'd never heard from him in 15 years of working together. Gabriel, I'm standing in the pump room right now. They made me witness this test even though I told them directly, face to face, on the record, that the controller wasn't properly commissioned, that we hadn't completed the full startup sequence. They didn't care. They needed a witness signature, so they put me in the room. What happened during the test? The discharge pressure hit 111 pounds per square inch, 14 points under the 125 pounds per square inch threshold on the stamped hydraulic calculations for this project. The transfer switch threw 3 fault codes I've never seen before, codes that shouldn't even be possible if the controller was programmed correctly. The jockey pump kicked on and off 6 times in 2 minutes, which means there's a pressure leak somewhere in the system that nobody ever found. And when the fire department guy asked for the commissioning documentation showing the pump had already passed preliminary testing, Scooter handed him the letter, I said, already knowing. Yeah, the certification letter the consultant signed. The one claiming all life safety systems passed acceptance testing and are ready for occupancy. The AHJ rep read it, looked at the pump sitting there throwing alarms with pressure 14 points low, looked at Scooter standing there trying to explain, and his whole expression just changed. What did the AHJ rep say? He didn't say anything at first. That was the worst part. He just looked at the pump, looked at the pressure gauge reading 111 when it should have read 125 per the project calcs. Looked at the certification letter in his hand. Then he looked at Scooter. Then what? He folded the letter very carefully and put it in his clipboard. Then he turned to Scooter and asked one question, real flat. Who wrote this? Scooter started stammering about the consulting engineer, about the process. The AHJ rep didn't wait for him to finish. He walked out of the pump room without saying another word, just turned and walked out like Scooter wasn't even there. I followed him to the lobby. He's on the phone with his supervisor right now. I can hear him through the door saying phrases like falsified documentation and potentially fraudulent certification, and we need to escalate this to the state fire marshal's office. Another text from Pete. They're shutting us down. All life safety work stopped immediately pending formal investigation. Scooter's trying to blame instrumentation error, but the fire marshal himself just arrived, and he's not buying any of it. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my seat. The test failure itself wasn't surprising. I'd known those systems weren't ready. What I hadn't fully anticipated was how fast everything would cascade once the AHJ saw that certification letter next to a pump throwing alarms. By 5 o'clock that evening, it was official. The AHJ failed the acceptance test, froze all further inspections and approvals, and put occupancy on hold pending investigation into the discrepancy between certified documentation and actual system performance. TCO application denied. The owner's insurance carrier dispatched their own independent engineering team to conduct a comprehensive assessment of every life safety system in the facility. The smoke control test happened the following week after the hold was partially lifted to allow diagnostic evaluation. The results were significantly worse than the fire pump failure. Stair pressurization systems are designed to maintain a minimum pressure differential of 0.05 inches of water column between the stairwell and the adjacent corridor, preventing smoke from entering the stairs during a fire event so occupants can evacuate safely. That's basic life safety code. 3 of the 4 stairwells in the Meridian Tower tested below 0.03 inches of water column, which is a failure. 2 of them actually showed negative pressure differentials during certain test conditions, meaning they would actively draw smoke into the stairwells rather than keeping it out. The systems designed to save lives during evacuation would instead create death traps. The fire marshal's comprehensive walk-down inspection found 17 fire-stopping penetrations through rated assemblies that didn't match the approved documentation and couldn't be verified as code compliant. Rated fire doors with incorrect hardware that wouldn't latch properly during a fire event. Missing duct smoke detectors and return air plenums serving patient care areas. Fire and smoke dampers that had been physically installed in the ductwork, but never wired to the fire alarm system. Scooter tried to explain each deficiency as isolated. Subcontractor installation error. Documentation problem that could be resolved with additional paperwork. The fire marshal listened with the patient expression of someone who'd heard these excuses many times before. He took detailed notes on everything Scooter said. Then he asked to see the commissioning logs showing exactly who had verified each component and when. The logs showed Scooter's initials on verification steps that never actually happened. The consultant's certification based on a 3-day site visit that couldn't possibly have covered the scope described. The fire marshal didn't issue citations that day. He did something worse. He formally requested a joint meeting with the building owner, GC executive leadership, the project bonding company, and the owner's insurance carrier. I heard afterward that Stan tried to blame the failures on my departure, said I'd left critical work incomplete, suggested I might have deliberately sabotaged documentation on my way out. The fire marshal asked one straightforward question. Who signed the life safety readiness certification letter? The answer wasn't my name. The 6 weeks following the failed acceptance tests were absolute chaos at Ridgeline. The building owner froze all remaining contract payments pending resolution of the life safety deficiencies and a satisfactory explanation of how falsified certification documents had been submitted to regulatory authorities. The bonding company that had guaranteed the project opened a formal investigation into whether the work had been properly managed and whether their exposure was going to result in significant claims. The insurance carrier required independent third-party verification of all completed work before they would even consider reinstating coverage for the facility. Pete called me in the middle of that chaos, his voice exhausted in a way I'd never heard from him. They're blaming my crews for everything now, he said. Scooter submitted formal documentation to the bonding company investigator claiming we installed wrong materials, deviated from approved submittals, failed to follow specifications. He went back and altered inspection sign-off forms after the fact, changed dates, changed specification references, made it look like we deviated from approved materials when we installed exactly what the submittals told us to install. That's document fraud. That's criminal. I know it's fraud, but the company lawyers are involved now, and they're circling the wagons to protect leadership. My union steward's telling guys not to talk to anyone without legal representation present. My cousin won't even look at me on site anymore because his foreman told him to stay away from anyone connected to Consolidated until this shakes out. The fire marshal's investigation is going to subpoena the original documentation from the project servers. The bonding company's auditors are going to pull email records and submittal logs and change tracking data. If Scooter altered documents after they were originally created, the electronic timestamps and metadata will show exactly when those changes were made and by whose login credentials. And if the investigation doesn't dig deep enough to find that evidence, this much money is at stake, they'll dig. Bonding company has millions in exposure. Insurance carrier has even more. They'll hire forensic accountants and document examiners who do this professionally. If the fraud is there, they'll find it. Pete was silent for a long moment. Then, are you going to help us? Actively help us, I mean? I'm going to tell the complete truth when I'm asked, and I'm going to make sure I get asked. That's the help I can provide. Haley called 2 days later. The hospital had officially announced a minimum 3-month delay, possibility of more depending on remediation progress. Her position was being held, but the clawback was enforced. She owed $8,000 she'd already spent on apartment and living expenses, money she didn't have available to repay. Dad, I'm sorry. She'd been crying. I was so angry at you. I blamed you for creating problems, for being difficult, and you were right about everything. I didn't want to be right. I wanted the building safe and your job to start on time. Those should have been compatible. What happens now? The building gets fixed. Systems get properly tested by people who know what they're doing. It opens eventually, and it'll actually be safe. But it takes longer and costs more than if they'd done it right initially. Her voice hardened. The nurses are all talking. Someone falsified safety certifications. The hospital could have opened with systems that didn't work. People could have died. Patients who couldn't evacuate. Staff trying to help them. Me. My friends from nursing school. I know. Ridgeline's HR contacted me 3 times during this period. First to remind me of the standard confidentiality provisions in my original employment agreement and suggest any public statements could be considered violations subject to legal action. Second, to offer a settlement package in exchange for a comprehensive release preventing cooperation with any investigation or legal proceeding. I declined. The third call came from their head of employee relations. Voice smooth and practiced. We'd hate for you to complicate things, Gabriel. For everyone's sake, then tell your people to stop forging. Long pause. The call ended. I saved that voicemail. My attorney said it might prove useful as evidence of attempted witness intimidation. Stan and Scooter turned on each other 5 weeks into the investigation. The bonding company's forensic auditors recovered email records showing Stan had directly instructed Scooter to expedite certification by whatever means necessary to meet timeline. Scooter had responded by documenting his concerns in an email he'd written but never sent, saving it in his drafts folder as insurance. But Ridgeline's exchange server retention policy meant even unsent drafts got backed up to the corporate archive, and the e-discovery process pulled it. When confronted with Scooter's unsent email, Stan claimed he never gave those instructions and Scooter had acted independently. When shown the discrepancy, Scooter claimed his father had pressured him into actions he knew were wrong. The bonding company's final report recommended immediate termination of both Stan and Scooter, referral of the consulting engineer to the state licensing board, and notification of relevant authorities regarding potential criminal charges. I started at Cornerstone Building Sciences on a Monday morning in late October, after the leaves had started changing color in the mountains west of Denver. My first 2 weeks were orientation, getting up to speed on their processes and systems, meeting the team. Then came my first major assignment. Cornerstone had been retained by the Meridian owner's insurance carrier for independent commissioning oversight of all remediation work on the life safety systems. My specific role: verify that every deficiency identified in the investigation was properly corrected, every system met code requirements, every document accurately reflected actual installed conditions. The same building where I'd been stripped of authority, pushed toward the exit, and set up to take the fall, was now a building where I held absolute veto power over the path to completion. Stan was terminated by Ridgeline's board of directors 3 weeks before I started the oversight engagement. The official explanation cited project management deficiencies, resulting in significant financial exposure and reputational damage to the company. The unofficial explanation was that the bonding company had made his removal a non-negotiable condition of continuing their guarantee on the project. Scooter resigned 2 days after his father's termination. His LinkedIn profile now says independent construction management consultant, but word travels fast in the Denver construction community. As far as I've been able to determine, he hasn't secured any consulting clients. The consulting engineer who signed the fraudulent certification had his professional license suspended by the state board pending formal hearing. Criminal referral was under consideration by the district attorney's office. Pete's crews were formally cleared of any wrongdoing in the final investigation report. The forensic document analysis proved exactly what he'd told me. They installed exactly what was specified, and problems originated from management decisions and documentation fraud at levels far above the field. His company received a substantial change order for corrections that weren't their fault, and their reputation in the local market improved once the truth came out. But it wasn't free. Pete told me later his guys lost close to 400 hours of work during the stop work period. Consolidated ate about $12,000 in legal fees fighting the false accusation. A few of his younger guys quit during the uncertainty, spooked by the rumors. The vindication was real, but so was the damage. The remediation took 4 months of intensive work. I witnessed every acceptance test personally, reviewed every piece of documentation for accuracy and completeness, walked every floor with the fire marshal, and answered every technical question he had about the systems and their verification procedures. The fire pump passed on the first attempt after the motor was replaced and controller properly programmed by someone who actually understood the system. Smoke control achieved full compliance after significant rebalancing. All fire stopping was removed and reinstalled with proper documentation. Fire alarm verified device by device, circuit by circuit. The tower received its certificate of occupancy in February, 7 months behind Stan's promised schedule. Haley started her surgical ICU position the following week. The hospital worked out a payment plan for her clawback. Cornerstone paid me a project completion bonus that I quietly used to pay off her remaining balance. She called me the night before her first shift. "Dad," I walked through the building during orientation. "Everything's where it should be. That's how it's supposed to work. I just wanted to thank you for walking away instead of going along." The next morning, I drove to the Meridian Tower for a final walkthrough with the fire marshal. We took the stairs together, all 14 floors, checking every landing, every pressurization sensor, every door closer. At the top, he signed the final approval, handed me the official copy. "Clean job, Nolan. Should have been you from day one." I walked back down alone. In the lobby, I passed a group of nurses in scrubs heading toward the elevators. One of them was Haley. She didn't see me, but I saw her, laughing with her colleagues, starting her first real day. I walked out to my truck and pulled out my phone. Texted Pete, "You're cleared. Final report confirmed. Your guys are good." His reply came 30 seconds later. "About damn time. Stakes on me." I started the engine and pulled out of the lot. The Meridian Medical Tower filled my rearview mirror, 14 stories of glass and steel, ready to receive its first patients. I never looked back. Guys,